Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this installment of the CORBEL webinar series. Today, we are very pleased to have with us Dr. Michael Linden from ELIXIR Finland and Kostas Komantaros from GEO. They're going to present single sign-on for life science services. My name is Vera Matzer, and I'm involved in the CORBEL project on behalf of EBI, and I'll be hosting today's webinar. I'll also man the question function. Before we continue, I want to just make you aware that this webinar is being recorded, including the question and answer session at the end, and we will be making it available on the CORBEL YouTube channel and the CORBEL website. Now, we've reserved some time at the end to have questions and for discussion. I'd like to ask you to write your questions in the questions function, as you can see, and we'll go through them at the end. Now, before I introduce our speakers, I'm going to briefly introduce the CORBEL project to you. So CORBEL is an Horizon 20 project that brings together 13 research infrastructures within the biomedical science. And CORBEL aims to transform the understanding of biological mechanism and to help translate them into medical care. Now, modern biological and biomedical research often involves very complex projects, and there is a variety of different technologies, and very often they operate at the interface between different disciplines. Now, CORBEL aims to help these projects by harmonizing access and services for research when that research involves more than one RI. So this could be a biological and medical technologies, but also biological samples and data services. So today's presenter, we've got Dr. Michael Linden. He coordinates the life science authentication and authorization infrastructure, so AAI. So the specification of AAI, and also he's the editor of the requirement specifications for the Life Science AAI. He works for the Finnish ELIXIR node and leads the AAI task in ELIXIR, and he holds a doctoral degree in information security from Tampere University of Technology. Our second speaker is Kostas Komantaros. He's a project manager and software engineer on grid and cloud technologies at GRNet. From 2004 to 2010, he was acting as the Regional Operations Center Technical Manager for Southeastern Europe on a series of EC projects called EG. And since 2010, he's also acting as the NGI Manager for NGI GRNet. Kostas is currently coordinating the joint effort by GANT, EGI, and EUDAT to provide AAI solutions for the life science community. Now I'm going to hand over to our first speaker.
So, good afternoon. I am Michael Linden. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, I'll give the first part of this presentation, and this is the outline of the presentation. So first, some description of what identity management, or AAI, as we usually call it in the context of research and education sector, what is it all about, and why we believe life science research infrastructures need collaboration on AAI. Short history of the life science AAI and the future steps, and then some technical features of the upcoming life science AAI as we currently plan them. And then in the end of this webinar, my colleague Kostas will give a demo on the life science AAI and Life Science ID based on the pilot setup we have at the moment. So, what is identity and access management, or AAI? We have here in the left-hand side an end user Bob Smith. He is a researcher, and in the right there is a resource. The resource can be basically anything that requires managed access. It can be a sensitive data set. It can be also compute resource like compute cluster or cloud or anything. In principle, identity and access management means 4 things. First one is identity. The end user, Bob in our example, is issued an identity to the resource. In practice, it means that a new row is added to the end of the resource's user database. So a new line whose name for a person whose name is Bob Smith and who is given a username Bob26, just in case there are several persons with the same name. Second component of identity and access management is authorization. The one who manages the resource decides who can access the resource. And if it is a sensitive data set, the typical approach in life sciences, or at least in when it comes to human data, is that there is a data access committee who decides which researchers can access the dataset. Typically, it means Bob needs to fill a data access application and attach his research plan to the data access application, which is then submitted to the data access committee for their review and approval. Assuming Bob gets his access rights, the next step is authentication or verification of Bob's identity. Somehow Bob convinces the resource that he is indeed the person who holds the username Bob26. And for decades we have been using passwords for authentication, and as long as I have been around, people have been expecting passwords to little by little disappear and be replaced by something more secure like multi-factor authentication. But still today we are using passwords in quite many services. And the fourth component is audit and reporting functionality. Anyone who wants to know who has access rights to the resource can print the audit reports on the resource and the permissions there. It can be the data access committee themselves, or it can be the funding body who wants to be demonstrated that the valuable resource they have been funding is actively in use. But in the near future, in little more than 1 month, in Europe, we will have also the General Data Protection Regulation becoming effective, and it imposes new requirements for the resource owners to demonstrate that they have managed information security properly there. And it also imposes new requirements on being able to demonstrate who has access and what are the grounds for the access rights. So this diagram is generic, and the next slide explains what federated identity means. In the previous slide, we have just one resource component, but in this slide, we have actually 2 components. We have split the one resource into 2 functionalities. We call them identity provider and relying service. And the idea is that the identity provider is a separate service who is responsible for authenticating the user and managing their identity and attributes describing the user. And the relying service is then the research service that relies on the Federated AAI system. And it ultimately decides which authenticated user can access the service. So when Bob wants to log in, he is first authenticated by the identity provider server, which subsequently releases Bob's attributes to the relying service using the standard protocols we have, such as SAML or OpenID Connect. And the idea is that typically one identity provider serves multiple relying services, which has the benefit that Bob can have only single set of credentials and single sign-on to all the relying services. In the context of research infrastructures, we believe that the identity provider could be nicely operated by the research infrastructures for all those relying services, which are then the research service providers managing services to the user communities. So that's the approach that has led us to develop these AAI systems within research infrastructures in life sciences, and also the other thematic clusters are having an AI projects of their own. I'm coming from ELIXIR research infrastructure, and this is the ELIXIR AAI system we have launched in the end of 2016. The idea is that the relying services are upstairs, they are up here, and the relying services can be data archives like EGA, or they can be compute clouds, IaaS clouds, or also simple services like e-learning, wiki, intranet, simple tools which have actually been quite popular in the context of ELIXIR as well. Downstairs are the authentication providers, which are external from the ELIXIR point of view. And we are currently in ELIXIR AAI, we are relying on the EduGain service, which allows the researchers to use their home organization, their home university or home research institution logins or usernames and passwords to log into ELIXIR. But also some commercial authentication providers like Google and LinkedIn are provided. And in the middle is the ELIXIR AAI service. In the left-hand side, there are the services for user authentication, proxy IDP service, where the user lands before they actually arrive to the relying service. And because the authentication that common providers like Google or LinkedIn provide is not necessarily doesn't necessarily give guarantees on its assurance and reliability. We have a step-up authentication component which can be used to step up the authentication to a bit higher level if the relying service requires more than just password-based authentication. In the right-hand side, there are services which can be used to assign extra attributes to the authenticated users, like management of groups and roles that are meaningful in the context of the relying services, and also management of researchers' status as bona fide researcher, which is useful for some sensitive services, but for those services where data access committee needs to actually decide if the user has access to the service, to the dataset, there is a separate dataset authorization management system which helps the researchers to submit and the data access committees to review the researchers' data access applications. So that's the concept we have in the ELIXIR research infrastructure. But in the context of life sciences and CORBEL project, we have realized that actually in quite many circumstances, the same researchers are using services from several research infrastructures, and having some collaboration on AAI would mean the researchers have less identities and usernames and credentials for authentication, which would make the researcher's life a bit easier, or at least less confusing with all those credentials they need to access the services. We also found that many of the life science research infrastructure have similar needs. Those CORBEL research infrastructures who are dealing with sensitive data, the needs are often quite similar, related to reliable authentication of the researchers and fine-grained access management or authorization management for access to sensitive data. We also realized that developing and operating an AAI service is actually quite expensive, especially the more comprehensive features like multi-factor authentication or those workflow systems for applying for access rights to datasets. So we can actually have some more features with less costs when we do it centrally for all participating research infrastructures. But it also requires we need to find a sustainable cost model for managing the service even when the projects we have over. In the dialogue between the life science research infrastructures, we also found that few life science research infrastructures feel that AAI is the core competence. So instead, we would like to partner with the e-infrastructures who have a long history with AAI and where the authentication and authorization is something more core to the nature of the e-infrastructures. So that's the short history of AAI collaboration in the context of CORBEL project. In the CORBEL project structure, it belongs to work package 5. And the first meeting we had was nearly 2 years ago, together with AARC or ARC project, which is an EC-funded project that stands for Authentication and Authorization for Research Collaboration. It is a cross-discipline project for developing features and functionalities and common approaches for authentication and authorization in the context of research services. And we have had a 2-day workshop in Paris, which triggered collection of use cases for a common life science AAI. And that work was carried in autumn 2016. And once we had the use cases collected and documented, we compiled the use cases into a requirement specification, which defines the functionality of the life science AAI. There's a link to the requirement specification if you want to have a look. So it defines a requirement without taking any position to the actual architecture and implementation of the AAI system. 1 year ago, ARC2 project started as a follow-up project of ARC1, and 4 of the life science research infrastructures became project members. And the intention was to have a pilot of Life Science AAI in the project. And in November last year, the pilot started, and as I mentioned in the previous slides, we wanted to have a pilot where e-infrastructures actually operate the pilot AAI system for us. And we received a common proposal from 3 e-infrastructures, EGI, EUDAT, and GEANT. And during the winter, those 3 e-infrastructures have been operating the Life Science AAI pilot for us. The first phase of the pilot ended in the end of January. And soon Kostas will give a demo on that pilot. But before that, some future plans on the Life Science AAI. In March, the project consortium for EOSC-Life submitted the project proposal to the EC. And in that project proposal, the proposed work package 5 aims at deploying the Life Science AAI into production during the EOSC-Life project. And that work package is based on the ARC2 pilot. And in the project, the goal is also to establish a sustainable model for management and coordination of the Life Science AAI, which includes kind of proper governance within the participating life science research infrastructures, but also funding model and related policies for the AAI. The intention is that we in the life science research infrastructures won't actually operate the servers and services that are the Life Science AAI. Instead, we want to partner with the e-infrastructures who would operate the services for us. So, brief introduction of features of the Life Science AAI as they are described in the requirement specification. So the intention is that the preferred way for the users, for the researchers, is that they log in using their home organization credentials, so their home university, their home institution usernames and passwords. We also plan to support commercial authentication providers like Google and LinkedIn, and community efforts like ORCID, which is becoming more and more popular in the context of research. And then as the last resort for those people who can't use any of the previously mentioned ones, we would operate hostel IDP, where researchers can register their identity and accounts. For those services who require more than password-based authentication, we would have step-up authentication service for multi-factor authentication, potentially making use of users' cell phones or smartphones for second authentication factor. The technical interfaces for the relying services are assumed to be SAML2 and OpenID Connect. And those two appear to be the most widely used at the moment. We would also support X509-based certificates, which are used at least for CRID-FTP. And then we would have an API for provisioning and deprovisioning the end users to the relying services. At least in the context of ELIXIR AAI, we have found that useful because services like mailing lists, mailing list managers, mailing list management servers want to receive and will receive the users' group memberships in order to automatically register the user to the proper mailing lists based on their group memberships. That kind of features have been found useful in the previous projects. For decorating the users with extra attributes, we plan to have an attribute that describes the user's home organization affiliation, if they are a researcher in a particular university or have some other kind of affiliation there. The researcher's home research infrastructure, whatever it means, it's still not fully defined. Researchers' qualifications as a researcher, we call it bona fide researcher. The researcher's permissions to access datasets and the researcher's memberships in groups relying on the relying services are consuming, and in case the researcher needs to be in a certain role when they log into them and explicitly define the role which they are assuming when they log into a particular service, we plan to have a mechanism where the user can, for instance, select that during this session I'm logging in as a representative of project XYZ, so the relying service can make sure that, for instance, in the compute environment, the user can see only those datasets that belong to project XYZ, but not the datasets they may be permitted to see in the context of some other project membership. So that was the brief description of the features we plan to have in the Life Science AAI. And as mentioned, the deployment is planned to start in EOSC-Life project if it's approved. And I think that ends my side of this presentation, and now it's time for Kostas to give a demo.
Hi everyone from myself. Can you see my screen now? I'm not going to use a PowerPoint presentation for the demo, of course. So you should be able to see a Chrome screen showing you what we call a test service provider, which is in essence is what Michael was referring as a relying service. Now we use this to test the whole, let's say, infrastructure we put in place as a pilot, which is currently in phase 2, where we add more features and functionality to the generic service, the generic part of the generic functionality I'm going to demonstrate now. So let's imagine what you see in front of us is a service for you use in your daily operations, like a relying service. I will choose LSAAI to log in, which will, sorry, my network is a bit slow, which will redirect me to the where are you from page. It's a discovery page where you find all the identity providers of each institution. I work for GRNet, so I will select my identity provider. Log in with the classic username I have from my company, and internally, let's say, identity. And now, yes, sorry, this should not be. This is a reminder from the, let's say, registration service that I should have extended my membership, but I think we can overcome this in a simple way. Sorry, if I try to log in with a different account, sorry. Yeah. Now, as always in demos, some things go wrong when we don't want them to do. So I needed to restart my Chrome browser to clear all the caches. So in this case, I will use a test IDP or identity provider we have just to avoid any conflicts. So I used a generic account, could be that being from, let's say, my home IDP, it will act exactly the same. Now, this is a small thing we need to fix. When you log in, it redirects you again to choose the same one. But that's a minor thing that needs to be fixed. As I said, this is a pilot still, which we are not in full progress mode. And now I'm being redirected to the registration page for Life Science because the user I used is a new member wanting to join the Life Science, let's say, VO, the virtual organization. So the only thing I need to add, as you can see, the information about the user is already passed, his email address, his name. I just need to add a nickname just for, let's say, registration purposes. And now the user is registered. Right, you see that we submitted the registration. I will now need to again close my Chrome browser so that I can show you with an account that is already registered what's going on. So again, I do the same process. And we end up in the, let's say, an attribute release page. This is where the user needs to choose if they want or not to share some information. And as this is now, as you can see, the information we said is my name, my email address, and this long unique ID, which is one of, let's say, the major functionalities of the Life Science AAI. This is a unique ID for every user registered with Life Science, which can be used to identify myself, for example, in every airline service as being unique. And a service, all the services can know who I am in every service and can identify themselves. They can, let's say, match my identity in relying service A with the identity I have in relying service B. And this helps this, for example, to have a background communication between relying service A and relying service B, and also helps in accounting and reporting and having, let's say, a complete view of the profile we have. And if as soon as login, this is just the demo example of the information that is passed to a relying service like this demo SP. Now, this specific relying service I use is based on SAML2. We also have the VAT service, which is a token translation service, tries to, let's say, translate SAML or IDC credentials into X509 credentials or SSH keys or things like that, so that you can have access to legacy services with ease. I will again log in with my home IDP. And since I logged in just now in the same session, it just didn't ask for a password. It continues to identify me that I'm logged in. And you can see that we have the same unique ID we had before is also here. This implies that I'm exactly the same user with the same ID everywhere. So I can, for example, I can access a computing resource with my ID and have access to all the data sets that belong, that are my identity is authorized to use, and compute them from a resource coming from an infrastructure A, even though the infrastructure service B is offering the data sets. And here we are in the Indigo, the VATS, the token translation service, which allows me to request for a certificate. It allows me to upload my SSH key so that I can have access to SSH command line interfaces. And this is, let's say, another way to translate from your institutional IDP to identity to something which is used some of the legacy authentication mechanisms like X509 certificates and SSH. And I think this is all I had to do for the demo. So Vera, you wanna continue?
Yes, thank you. So in that case, we'll be taking questions. If you want to type your questions in the questions box, then we'll take them as they come. But as the first question, we've had a question submitted in advance. So is the AAI service available or extendable to other projects? It is of interest to IBIS-BA, which is the Synthetic Biology Project.
So this is Mikhail. The formal answer is that we don't know yet, because the exact policies Life Science AAI is going to have for relying services are not defined yet. But I would assume that a rather inclusive policy will be deployed for the Life Science AAI. For instance, synthetic biology sounds like very life science service. So if you ask me, I would assume that synthetic biology is certainly in the scope of the Life Science AAI, and the Life Science AAI can serve it.
Okay, thank you. One of the other questions we've got is a question about what will happen to the ELIXIR AAI when the Life Science AAI gets deployed.
So the intention is that the Life Science AAI can serve all the and fulfill the needs of all the research infrastructure AAIs in the life sciences. So over time, I would assume that ELIXIR AAI is migrated to the Life Science AAI, but that decision needs to be done by the ELIXIR research infrastructure, and we can make that decision in the EOSC-Life work package 5 if and when the project starts.
Okay, then we've got an additional question submitted. For the unique IDs, could ORCID have been used?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. In principle, yes. Although the unique ID is really the cornerstone of the Life Science AAI and any AAI. So it imposes then also requirements on the availability of the ORCID service. But it's certainly a question that deserves more discussion if the community wants to go to that direction.
If I can add to that, now the idea for a unique life science ID is that we have, let's say, the ownership of this is not something we publish around. It's an internal, let's say, mechanism to identify users with the same idea. Now, relying to an external service like ORCID, which is a commercial service in essence, binds life science into using another provider, and that might change its terms at some point. It might ask for people to let's say to subscribe to their service, and or people might not want to use, for example, the idea of let's say ORCID or something like that. They may not be willing to release information to a commercial service. What life science tries to do is reuse, let's say, your home institution identities and extend them with a unique ID, so that all the services you access within the life science environment identify you as the same person. Now, I need to also add that one of the features we are planning to support is that you can link or social IDs, you can link, let's say, ORC ID, for example, with your life science ID. So at least you can have, but this is done from a user's point of view in a simple way, the simple workflow we have for that, which allows the user to link these two accounts. But that doesn't mean that they cannot keep on using, for example, the life science ID when they decide to close their ORCID ID. It's also up to the user to decide if they want to do something, use this functionality or not.
Okay, thank you. I can see that someone started typing a question, but it didn't come through properly. So if you want to just type it again, and if there are any other questions, please add them to the question box. So if not, what I'd like to do is I'd like to just announce the next webinar we've got coming up as well. Oh, I think the questions come through. Let me just check. Yes. So presumably the lengthy, complex, unique life science ID is always carried via user or institutional credentials instead of having to type them in and save.
Yes, of course. No, the user will never actually type in or use this as in any means. The mechanism behind it, the framework behind it, will handle, let's say, the transfer of this and the usage of this unique ID. It's long and obscure, and so that it can be unique throughout life sciences in every service that exists for as many thousands of users that might exist. But it's not the, let's say, the username a user will ever use to log in anywhere. It's, in essence, it's only as soon as we have this into full production, I doubt the user will ever see this ID. Okay. And they don't need to be honest.
Okay, in that case, I would like to thank today's speakers very much, and the audience for coming. The webinar will be made available, or the recording of the webinar will be made available on the website and YouTube channel, so have a look within the next week or so. And then the next webinar we've got coming up, we've got two LC webinars coming up. The first one will actually be on the 5th of June, but the details haven't been completely confirmed. That will come soon. The next one will be on the 10th of July, which is BBMRI ERIC LC Help Desk, personalizing LC support with Yashocha CORBEL from BBMRI ERIC. So tune in for that. And I want to thank you very much.